Hi guys, so today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the overall characteristics of the Italian Renaissance. First, let's start with the years. So we can say roughly between 1350 and 1600 is the entire span of the Renaissance. But the height of the Renaissance is really going to be about 1450 to about 1527. Um, so it's important to realize that not only am I going to talk to you in years, but we're also really going to talk about centuries. So when we look at this period of time, it's the 14th through the 17th centuries. Um, that's important for us to understand. So if we're talking about the 1300s, it's the 14th century. So whatever the century is, minus one, that's the actual year span. So we are in the 21st century right now. It's the 20, and we're in the 2000s. So again, this is the general time period. And this is a time of rebirth. And it's important for us to go back just a little bit. So, this is the Roman Empire at its height. You have to understand that the heart of the Roman Empire is Italy. Okay. And so, Italy here is in the center of the entire empire. And that's where um, it was like the home base of all of Rome, hence, the city Rome right there in the middle of the spotlight. So when we look at this, it's important to realize that the Roman Catholic Church started during the Roman Empire, and it was a transition away from having multiple religions into one religion. It was one way to unify the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire fell, the um, the Holy Roman Catholic Church stayed in power and continued to dominate in Europe. So we're going to see the seat of the church here in Rome, and all of this pink area in Europe is going to be under control of the Holy Roman Empire. I'm sorry, the Holy Roman Church. And so you need to understand the title of the church. So it's Roman because it was built in the Roman Empire. It's Catholic because the term Catholic is a Latin word that means universal. So it is the Roman Universal Church. Everyone in Rome, the Roman Empire, practices this religion. So again, it's Roman because it's built in Rome. Catholic means universal, and the church is obviously a place of worship. So the Holy Roman Catholic Church means that it was the universal religion for Rome. And this matters to us only because as the Roman Empire crumbles, Europe really is kind of held together by the Roman Catholic Church. It is the only religion accepted in Europe as we get to the Middle Ages. It's important to realize that when we're looking at the Middle Ages, there are some um, very specific characteristics, and there's not all of them. Here are just a few. One, it's fragmented feudal society, meaning that there are not centralized governments the way we know today. France kind of existed, but it was, the king had only a little bit more power than many of the nobility and the knights did. The Middle Ages in Europe was based on an agrarian economy. Everything revolved around the production of and the selling of food. There weren't a lot of consumer goods being made, not a lot of cloth, just the bare minimums for people to survive and cover themselves. And then, and again, those are, remember, if you're going to have cotton or you're going to have cloth, wool, that's all revolving around agriculture. Wool comes from sheep. The Roman Catholic Church dominates thought and culture and politics throughout the Middle Ages. The Pope is the King of Kings. So everybody answers to the Pope, everybody answers to the church, and this makes them the most powerful political and religious entity in the world at this point in time. And then we have, just a lot of challenges, as we talked about yesterday: the Black Death, 100 Years' War. There was the Little Ice Age, the Great Schism. There's just a lot of um, dis. There's just a lot of you know problems that the people are dealing with in the Middle Ages. And the Renaissance is a little different, but has some similarities. One, we're seeing in the Renaissance, we're going to see the development of political centralization. So the kings are going to start centralizing their power, meaning that they're going to really start to create a flow of taxes up to the king and a flow of orders down from the king. The knights, the vassals, and the nobility are going to really lose some of their power. Um, and the way the kings are going to do that is through taxation. bringing the nobility kind of into their fold and having them be a part of this centralization process. And it's really going to create a very solid social structure that we'll be talking about soon. We start to see in these urban centers these commercial capitalist economies building. Agriculture is still the mainstay of the European economy, but in places like Venice, Milan, and and even as far north as like London and some of your German states, you're going to start to see a little bit of capitalism, these trade networks and trade centers develop to get people more things quickly. We're going to see growing secular control of thought and culture. As the Renaissance moves forward, people are going to challenge the power of the church. And what secular means is non religious. So we're going to see more non religious control over thought and culture, but it's a slow process. I do not want you guys to take away from this that religion stopped being important. The Catholic Church and religion is going to stay very powerful throughout the 1400s into the 1500s. We're going to start to see a lot of challenges to the Catholic Church. And by about 1648, which is the end of our first period, we see absolutists are in power. And the church is basically being subjugated by the king. So the Pope will no longer be the King of Kings by the 17th century. But there is also a lot of conflict. Italy is constantly invaded. They're fighting each other. They're divided into many different city-states. I'm just going to look at a different play. And so we'll talk about that in a moment. Just a couple images here. So you can see this is Middle Ages art. Middle Ages art is very flat. It doesn't seem as realistic. I mean, you know that these are people, but their faces are kind of plain. You don't see the lines. You don't see a lot of emotion in these images. And if you'll notice, like a lot of the sizes are based off their spiritual size. So Mary is the largest thing in this painting because she's very, very important to the Christian religion. And if you look at the baby Jesus, well, the baby Jesus is nearly as big as all of these other people over here. And so, you know, having these two figures be so large is really important, and it kind of speaks to the significance of religion and the idea that as we look at medieval art, most people were painted based off of their theological size, meaning their religious side. So basically the lower down on the totem pole you were as far as religion goes, the less likely you were to be depicted in a large scale. And so again, we just have another one. You can see very flat. This is very Byzantine like images. You'll notice a lot of gold and darker colors here. We're going to see a change with that when we look at the Renaissance. One example of that is here. This is an early Renaissance piece, but you'll notice that it has a lot more bright and pastel-like colors. It has perspective, so the things in the back are starting to get smaller the farther back they go, all the way to you have these people. So it's a little bit more lifelike. The people's faces have a little bit more detail, and as we move and just their clothing, you can start to see the wrinkles in the clothing, the bends in their knees. You can kind of see the knobbiness of the knees on this guy over here. Let me show you this. You know, if we look here, the knobbiness of the knees. This one, you know, the taking off the hat. So, and we have the workers. And it's just a lot more detail. And then again, that perspective. So you're going to start to see a lot of shifts here in art as well as intellect and everything else. This was really covered in the reading. I just want to really point this out again too, that the Renaissance, the High Renaissance is 1450 to 1527. That means that when we think about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo, the painters of the Renaissance, they're working in this time period. So this is Italy at this point in time, and this is really important to understand. Like I started to talk about on that first slide, Italy is not a country; it is a collection of smaller city-states. So you have the Kingdom of Naples, the Papal States. Papal means papacy or the Pope. So the Papal States are kind of the heart. This is Rome, so they're the heart of the Catholic Church and the heart of Italy. You have Milan and Venice, Florence. All of these are city-states. The biggest, most significant city-states were Milan, Venice, Florence, and Genoa. The family that tends to have like the biggest, like we'll talk about the most in our class, is in Florence, the Medici family. And they controlled basically they controlled Florence as a dictatorship. Um, Alibet, a very, nice dictatorship. It was kind of like an iron fist with a velvet glove. And they were always behind the scene doing, controlling things without having direct control. Um, they were the bankers of Europe, so they're going to, Florence is a very wealthy place. In fact, we're going to start to see as we move through our class, some of the Medici family will marry into the royalty of other countries. Um, and they become great patrons of the art. And just, one of the most famous Medici tutors is going to be Galileo. He was actually hired by um, Cosimo to teach his son Lorenzo and his other children. And so you see that they are going to be huge patrons of science and art and things like that. The reason that this place right here, this Italy, is the starting place of the Italian Renaissance is twofold. One, it's the heart of the Roman Empire, so there's just a lot of history underneath in the catacombs. So literally in Rome, you can actually go down underground into what are called like a series of tunnels we call catacombs, and they can bring out all this ancient knowledge, and so they have access to this ancient Greek texts and ancient knowledge in a way that just nowhere else in Europe does, but also because of their trade routes. They're essentially the center of the world at this point in time, if you think about that map of the Roman Empire. And even though the Roman Empire no longer exists by 1450, 1494, or even well before that, the trade routes that were established by the Roman Empire are still really important. And so Italy's the center of that. So they had access to trade routes that connected them between Europe and the Middle East. They served as the center of trade, and they had they were like the biggest ports in the world. So the most goods, the most things that people were going to buy would go through the Italian peninsula. And they were initially independent city states governed as separate republics. And then over time, most of those republics become, despotic governments, basically. And in some cases, they even have some new kind of royalty developing, which we'll talk more about as we move on. When we look at the overall characteristics of the Renaissance, you have to understand there are three values and there are two vehicles. So the values are his story, right? His story: humanism, individualism, and secularism. This image here of David is very important. It's a great example of this. So in humanism, we're valuing not only the beauty of the human form, but the ability of human beings. So a man, Michelangelo's statue of David here was, so Michelangelo created the statue, so we're glorifying him and his creation, but we're also glorifying the human form. And if you can look at this image and zoom in, you'll start to see that you can literally see the veins in the hand. If you look in on his eye, you can actually see some of the eyelashes. The amount of detail here is insane. Individualism. The individuals are important. It's not just the collective that matters. And then secularism, the slow walk away from having the church at the center of the world and having a more science-based, more government, like political separation of government and religion. All of those things are the values. Again, that does not mean that religion's not important. The vehicles, how do we get there? Through trade and through invention. So trade is important because with Italy being at the center of the world and in the center of the trade, what we are able to see is that people are going to bring these ideas from Italy to Northern Europe, to the Middle East, to all these other places. Ironically, one place that they will not go is Russia. Russia does not experience the Renaissance. Large portions of Poland and northeastern Europe, again, will be entirely left out of this period of our class. You'll notice we don't even talk about them because they're not going to experience this time. And another important vehicle of how do we get these values across Europe is through inventions. And the most popular one is the printing press. You'll be reading something on that a little bit later this week. And what it does is it helps to spread the information from the Renaissance and using the vernacular, which is the common language. So in France, the vernacular is French. In England, the vernacular is English. In Rome, the vernacular is Italian, even though most educated people speak Latin. And so when we look at this, the overall characteristics of the Renaissance, um, I always say that they are the answer to the problems of the Middle Ages. Trade is expanding. We see the rise of humanism. Exploration is developing. Art is going to change dramatically, and it's going to influence intellectual changes and be influenced, I should say, by humanism, which is an intellectual movement. We're going to see new centralized monarchies as kings really try to take the power of their position and make themselves as powerful as or even more powerful than the Pope. We'll see the early scientific revolution, religious warfare connected to the Reformation, and more importantly, like an important part of this that we always forget is the economic recovery. The pandemic that was the Black Death and that combined with the Hundred Years' War just destroyed European economies. Much like we're experiencing today, we're having a huge economic downfall as a result of the pandemic because when people are sick and having a hard time getting out and working, then people can't buy as much. And so the Renaissance is a recovery from that period of time. It's going to take a while. So these are overall the main characteristics of the Renaissance. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Other than that, have a wonderful day, and don't forget you can sign up for my office hours if you wanted to talk about anything or if you wanted me to give you more detail about anything that was covered here. Okay,